Among the descendants of families that came to Japan when Korea was its colony, there is hope that a political thaw could ease the North out of its isolation. Tokyo, every time Jiro Oshima wants to see his siblings, he must travel to North Korea. Mr. Oshima, 79, a retired schoolteacher in Japan, takes a flight to Beijing, then another to Pyongyang, carrying small gifts like candy and underwear, and items that his siblings can sell, baby clothes, medicine, shoes. He has made the journey more than a dozen times since the 1960s, when his parents and siblings moved to the communist nation as part of a repatriation program that the world has largely forgotten. Now, as President Trump and North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, prepare for a second summit meeting, to be held in Vietnam this week, there is nervous anticipation that a political thaw could ease the North out of its long isolation. Perhaps nowhere is that hope stronger than among ethnic Koreans like Mr. Oshima in Japan, a community that embraced North Korea as the rest of the world cut it off. An estimated 322,000 ethnic Koreans in Japan are members of families that arrived during Tokyo's 35-year colonial occupation of Korea. Known as the Zainichi, most trace their roots to what is now South Korea. Nevertheless, much of the population has long identified more closely with the North, which wooed them in the early years of the Cold War with propaganda and funding for community groups and schools. Zainichi now live and work across Japan. Over the decades, the money they sent to relatives in North Korea helped keep the nation's economy afloat, while spies targeted them to gather intelligence. The Oshima's story is typical. Like thousands of other families, they were caught in a cul-de-sac of history, uprooted by the Second World War only to be split apart and stranded by the Cold War. For as long as I can remember, it has been the dream of the Zainichi people to see the North and South reunified, Mr. Oshima said recently. If only this could have happened a little earlier, he added, inhaling sharply to suppress his emotions. Close to 2 million Koreans came to Japan looking for work or were taken here as forced labor before and during World War II. Most returned after Japan's surrender. But hundreds of thousands remained as the Korean peninsula was divided into two nations and, a few years later, as it descended into the Korean War. Beginning in the late 1950s, Japan offered to help repatriate the Zainichi, many of whom were attracted to North Korea's socialist promises and an economy then larger than the South's. Nearly 100,000 people moved, including Mr. Oshima's parents and siblings. Mr. Oshima, 20 at the time, had intended to follow them, and was just waiting for word from his family. To circumvent censors, they used code. If they wrote in vertical script, as is typical in Japanese, it meant Mr. Oshima should join them. But if the writing was horizontal, that would be a warning to stay away. When the first letters arrived, the words marched across the page, left to right. Mr. Oshima's parents set sail from a village in southeastern Korea in 1934, searching for work as Japan's war machine was warming up. They settled in a small town in southern Japan and raised 5 children. Mr. Oshima's father supported them by chopping wood and selling charcoal. To disguise their heritage, they adopted a Japanese surname, which meant Big Island. Mr. Oshima recalled that classmates taunted them, asking, "Are Koreans actually human beings?" Discrimination was baked into the laws, which made it difficult for Zainichi to become citizens. Mr. Oshima hoped to study engineering but was barred from a specialized high school and ended up teaching at a Korean school. Most of his first pupils were from families preparing to move to the north. At the time, in the late 1950s, Japanese officials were quietly working with Pyongyang on a repatriation program. Their motives were economic and security concerns, enhanced by a large infusion of prejudice, wrote Tessa Morris Suzuki, a historian who published a book on the Exodus. They hoped to rid the country of those they saw as subversive and a welfare burden. North Korea saw an opportunity to replenish its workforce after the devastation of the Korean War. But the South, governed by a military dictatorship at the time, was worried that an influx of Zainichi might damage its weakened economy. Articles appeared in Japanese newspapers portraying the wonders of the North, where the authorities promised furnished apartments, jobs, rice and 3 months of coal to those who returned. The United States quietly raised concerns that some Zainichi might be pressured into moving. But it did not object to the program, Ms. Morris Suzuki wrote, because it wanted to protect its relationship with Japan. Among those who left Japan was a young girl who would one day become the mother of Kim Jong-un, the North's current leader. Mr. Oshima's family departed in 1960, boarding a ship from the port of Niigata on Japan's west coast. They were going home, free at last from Japanese rule.